Good morning, DawgNation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And it feels like I've been waiting a while for this. You know, hopefully we have a good, fun show every day, but this sort of feels like our first big Friday show of the season. I am really excited about Georgia, South Carolina on Saturday. There is nowhere else on the planet I'd rather be than right there in Athens, between the hedges on Saturday. I just can't wait for it. Massive recruiting day. Really fun showcase game for Georgia. In other words, we don't expect the game to necessarily be close, but we do expect it to be a kind of a proving ground for Georgia to demonstrate where it is at this point in the season and perhaps in a message to the rest of college football. So we're going to talk a bunch about that. We'll give you our final thoughts on the other big games of the weekend. There's also a couple of interesting topics we're going to kind of get into. Celebrating DeAndre Swift last night. Great performance from him in the NFL. There's a specific point about Swift I want to make. We'll do that here coming up in just a little bit. So we got some funny golden shoes. I'm telling you, we're just in a great mood on a Friday because this is the moment, and these are the kinds of moments that we live for. So let's dive in, get them going right now. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Coming up in a couple of minutes, we all like Kirby Smart, but we are not like Kirby Smart, if you get my drift there on that. And there's a specific reason why that's relevant for this Saturday. We'll talk more about that. I think fans have a very different perspective on Saturday's game against the Gamecocks than perhaps this Georgia coaching staff does. That's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but I do think it's worth at least spending a minute or two talking about what makes us all different going into this particular weekend. We will get there. Prior to that, this is a little bit of an important weekend for Georgia, not because we expect this game against South Carolina to be close. Hopefully it will not be. But it is a chance for Georgia to kind of prove what it's all about. And the vibe around Georgia right now completely different than it was a year ago. We expected this to be the case. And there's a simple reason for this. You know, Georgia kind of sleptwalked last year through games with, like, say, Samford and Kent State. And for the most part, I think right-thinking Georgia fans sort of shrugged all of that off. There's probably been a little bit less shrugging this year with the UT Martin and the Ball State at times lackadaisical play. Not always. It was, probably fine, but not quite. Oh my gosh, this is a team capable of winning a national championship game 65-7. That kind of vibe hasn't existed around Georgia for the first two games of the year. We're not caught off guard by that. We sort of expected that. The big difference that exists between Georgia this year and Georgia a year ago is that when Georgia kind of dialed it down for its performance against lesser competition, it had already played at a very high-end, top-end level to begin the season against Oregon, to begin the season against South Carolina. And so when Georgia was less than its best in later games that year, Georgia fans didn't have to get too worried about that because they'd already seen what Georgia in its highest gear had looked like, and there was a certain comfort that came from that. Well, the order of the games this year and the absence of a non-conference game like Oregon means you probably reach a little harder than you probably should. You probably search a little longer than you should to find some sort of meaning in the games against UT Martin and the games against Ball State, because for now, that's all you have. But after Saturday, we get an additional data point. And this is the thing that always blows me away about college football. This is a quick aside. Do you realize that after Saturday, the regular season is 25% of the way over? Does that not just blow your mind? That we wait months and months and months for this thing to get here. And at least in terms of the regular season, it's a quarter of the way done after Saturday. It's bizarre to me. But nonetheless, we've been waiting for a moment like this, a true data point that gives us some sort of indication of where Georgia is and what Georgia is. And by the way, it's not just media types like me, fans like you, fans like all of us. It's not just us who are trying to figure this out right now. It sounds like Georgia itself is in the process of figuring all of this out too. Offense has probably not been great as of yet. Defense probably hasn't quite yet flexed the way that we typically expect a Georgia defense to. And Kirby Smart this week was kind of asked about, hey, the motivation that Georgia has and the identity it seeks to establish. And Kirby Smart talked about that process of kind of figuring out what Georgia is. This first SEC game, a pretty good step towards doing that. This is what Kirby said this week.
I think every day is an identity deal. I mean, I look at every day independent of the previous. This is not something that this is what you are and this is where you stay. I mean, you're constantly moving. So we're constantly trying to improve. I said the other day, we want to be elite at getting better. So our goal today on Monday of South Carolina week is to be elite at getting better. And the teams that get better and improve tend to ascend as the year goes on, and that's ultimately our goal. As far as intrinsic motivation, I think that any good team needs to have that, because you can't do it on outward things that are tangible all the time. But intrinsically, you have to have the motivation to want to be as good as you could possibly be to reach your full potential, because you're not going to have an exterior motivation all the time. It's got to come from within you, and we got some guys on the team that got that. We got some that don't, but every team does.
So Kirby's seeking to find Georgia's identity and seeking to kind of demonstrate the level of motivation. And I believe that South Carolina is the perfect opponent for the next step in that journey for Georgia. And there's kind of a specific reason why I think that's true. As we've talked about a few times already this week, for whatever reason, and some of you think you have your reasons, but for whatever reason, Georgia the last 2 years in its national championship seasons has throttled South Carolina. Georgia has looked as much like a national champion as it has in any of its last 30 games in its last 2 times it's played the Gamecocks. Last year in Columbia, the year before that in Athens, Georgia has absolutely just obliterated the Gamecocks off the planet. So for a team that wants to demonstrate how motivated it is, wants to seek out and determine its identity, South Carolina on Saturday is the perfect team for Georgia to do that against. And I'm going to use the words of Shane Beamer here as a way of reminding Georgia what its identity is supposed to be. What is the calling card of Georgia for its last 2 national championship teams? What is the thing that has wowed people about Georgia so much? Well, Shane Beamer, in so many words, 2 years ago, when he got his first taste of this rivalry on the other side of Georgia in kind of a funny fashion, he let his entire fan base know, the entire media contingent that covers his team know exactly what he sees when he looks at Georgia. And Beamer's words, as somewhat humorous as they are, I think ought to be a wake-up call for Georgia about what it needs to show against these Gamecocks here this year. The identity that Georgia seeks, Shane Beamer told us 2 years what it is. This is what Beamer said after that game.
They've got like 100 5-star football players on their defense. They have a defensive lineman that weighs 340 pounds and runs better than everybody on this call. They've got 5-star defensive backs. They're big and physical and fast. I mean, other than that, they're really freaking good. That's why they have the top defense in the country. They're hard to run the football on. So there wasn't some magical scheme they came out with tonight. They got 5-star recruits everywhere, and they play really physically. Damn,
he says at the end. That's Georgia's identity. And that's what Georgia needs to remind people that it has on Saturday. Now, there are going to be some who are like, but they don't have Jalen Carter anymore. Well, guess what? In 2021, or I should say in the 2022 season, they didn't have Trayvon Walker anymore, or Jordan Davis anymore, or Devontae White anymore. You know, the idea that we're going to re-rack the how does Georgia replace so-and-so, we've been doing that conversation for 2 years. It hasn't mattered yet, and if Georgia's going to go for 3 in 23, which I believe it will, it needs to render that conversation irrelevant talking point again this year there as well. It needs to introduce some new defensive playmaking stars on Saturday and have a coach like Shane Beamer once again forced to acknowledge that they seem to have 5 stars everywhere, whether they're actual measurable 5 stars or not. Can they play like 5 stars between the hedges with an entire fan base frothing in the mouth for the first big showcase for Georgia to demonstrate to, as Beamer said, how really freaking good Georgia still is, the entire country watching tomorrow? Because really the fans outside of DawgNation, the media types around the country, they just haven't seen much of Georgia as of yet. Georgia's played at about 3/4 speed against teams that weren't half as good as UGA. That's not recipe for a very fun thing to watch. But Saturday, it's South Carolina. Gamecocks, of course, have already lost a game, but this is a real living, breathing opponent. This is an SEC game. It's a chance for Georgia to show what it is and what it's all about. And Shane Beamer's words there, I believe, are the statement that kind of points you in the right direction on this. That Georgia needs enough on offense, and they need to be, to use Beamer's phrase again, really freaking good on defense. That's what Georgia needs to be. That's what Georgia has been. That's what Georgia showed itself to be against South Carolina the last couple of years, and that's what needs to lead the way on Saturday there as well. This name brand, recognized, well-known defense needs to lead the way, let the offense find its footing, and that can be the recipe for Georgia to go out there and not just win on Saturday, but flex in the way that Georgia fans hope that they can. Now, the good news here is it seems like the Georgia defense is more than ready to do just that. They are sensing their moment is here to show the entire college football world that the 2023 defense is ready to do what oftentimes happened in 2022 and always happened in 2021, which is this is a group that's ready to flex against, by the way, a quarterback in Spencer Rattler who's good enough to do some damage to you if you let him. Let's keep that in mind, too, that while South Carolina may not be great, Rattler right now is among the very best quarterbacks in the SEC, so you need a good performance from Georgia defensively, but this group seems ready to provide that. In fact, let's go back to Jamon Dumas-Johnson earlier this week, who typically does not mince words. He's a great spokesman and leader for this unit, once again making it very clear that he views Saturday as a game to show what I'm calling for here, a day for Georgia to demonstrate its identity, that it is still the best defense in the entire country. This is what Jamon Dumas-Johnson said this week.
Whenever you play an SEC opponent, it's different. The mindset different. The practice different, the grind different. Especially for the older guys, the ones who've seen it already, going into an SC opponent matchup, just different. Especially the first one, it's kind of like a statement game right now. Sending everybody a message what we're really about.
You want to watch Georgia play a statement game on Saturday? I do. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see what Georgia looks like with a statement game type mentality. And that's what Jamon Dumas-Johnson says that Georgia has. And the good news is this is just not an idea that lives and dies with Jamon Dumas-Johnson. It permeates beyond him on this Georgia defense there as well, because another one of this team and this particular unit, the Georgia defense, another one of its great leaders is speaking in very much the same kind of way. Kamari Laster himself talking about what Georgia has a chance to prove on Saturday, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Here's Kamari Lassiter.
I would say, definitely, we have to flip the switch whenever we, start playing the SEC, just because, league play is different, SEC is different. We pride ourselves on being one of the best conferences in the country. So, we're going against the best teams in the country. So, whenever that happens, you have to turn your really level of play up a notch just to be able to compete at a high level.
Let's talk about specifically what that means for a moment, what Laster's discussing there, flipping the switch and turning up your level of play. If you care about point spreads and things like that, and if you only think about point spreads as a projection for the final outcome, you'll be, I think, kind of well within the parameters of this conversation. Georgia hasn't met expectations in either of its first two games here this year. But against SEC opponents, Georgia's covered the spread in 7 of its last 10, in 13 of its last 20. There seems to be a little bit of a different version of Georgia when it faces SEC competition. Plus, when you look at Georgia in the kind of like massive point spread games like we've seen the first 2 weeks of the year, Georgia's just 2-7-1 against the spread in its last 10 games at home when favored by more than 30 points. But on Saturday, they're not favored by more than 30 points. They're favored just inside of 4 touchdowns. And in that situation, favored less than 30 points at home, Georgia's covered in 4 of its last 5 and 6 of its last 8. Now, not every trend means something, but this is a trend that seems to match with what we see with our own eyes. That when Georgia feels like it's got a real opponent on the other side, it plays up to its standard. When Georgia has a chance to go out and showcase it against SEC competition, we do get what JDJ and Kamari Laster say they want to provide. A version of Georgia that does have the switch flipped and does have statement being ready to be made. Shane Beamer told you 2 years ago what he sees when he looks at Georgia. 5 stars everywhere, totally dominant on defense. That's what we all need to see again on Saturday. And if that version of the Georgia defense shows up, my guess is the offense will feed off that there as well, and the recipe that's worked for Georgia so well the last couple of years. Nobody playing defense better, and Georgia playing just enough offensively to match that. That can work out again for this team to go for 3 in 23. Next step on that journey gets a chance to be taken on Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, across all video platforms, radio on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, on-demand audio, anytime you want it, anywhere you want it. All the platforms there for you, too. You can find that there as well. Just really happy to have you as a part of our show today, and so thankful to our friends at Kroger who make it all possible. And it's time to talk about Kroger Chef Jr. again, by the way, because that's a fun thing coming up this month here, there as well. And how about a really cool menu item here for this month? It's the pepperoni pizza salad. This is a fun thing to be made on September 23rd. That's coming up at select Kroger locations. Of course, you've heard me talk about this before. Kroger Chef Jr., a 30-minute class, guided kid cooking experience where your child also, in addition, getting a chance to make this month the pepperoni pizza salad, also can get an apron, a patch, a chef's hat, a cutting board, a recipe card and holder, and it's just $7 per child. So make sure you check out more online on this. KrogerChefJr.com. The word junior spelled out Junior. KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. Also, let me very quickly remind you, as I've been telling you the last couple of days, DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River completely sold out, but you do have a chance to join our waiting list on this, and I don't have any control over this. I have no authority here, but we are going to, I know they're going to try to get as many people on the boat as possible because we want Tennessee fans as mad as they can be, and more Dog fans, the better for us on that. So get on the wait list. We'll get you in if we can. DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. Make sure you check that out. Wait list now. We can't. Now, listen, not everybody on the wait list is getting on, and maybe only a few people do, but I feel pretty confident at least a few people on the wait list will be able to be a part of our DawgNation Invasion. Incredible scene there on the Tennessee River prior to Georgia's dismantling of Tennessee in Neyland Stadium, which is what we think is going to happen later on in November. DawgNation.com for more details on that. All right, one of the things that makes the game day environment in Athens so big on Saturday, the presence of so many top-flight elite recruits. We're going to talk to Jeff Sintel, our DawgNation recruiting insider, about that visitor list here coming up in just a couple of moments. That's going to be really good. We'll get to that here in just a second. Prior to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse today, which is poured by the Finnish Long Drink. Now, I said this to kick off our show, and I'm going to kind of follow up on that now. We all like Kirby Smart, but in some very important ways, we are not like Kirby Smart. I sort of look like him today. I'm wearing a shirt that I believe I've seen Kirby Smart himself wear. Many of you wear apparel that's very similar to the apparel that we always see Kirby Smart, wearing. He graduated from Georgia. Many of you graduated from Georgia. There are similarities here, but there is just something different about a guy who kind of spends his life within the coaching fraternity that's different than most of us who are media fans, something like that. There's always going to be kind of a cultural divide there that becomes very, very difficult to bridge the gap on. I think Saturday is an example of that. Now, this is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just true. I believe that it is true. That Georgia fans view Saturday's game against South Carolina, at least a lot of them do, a certain pocket of them do. Georgia fans view Saturday's game against South Carolina a lot different than Kirby Smart does. Georgia fans have long memories about, like, say, 2019, when South Carolina came in here, got the upset victory there that day. It was a horrible day in Sanford Stadium. Georgia hasn't lost a home game since then. It's really crazy to think about the stuff that we used to sometimes have to talk about that we never talk about ever at all, like a game like South Carolina 2019 or some of the other stuff that kind of pops up from time to time. Just a lot of this stuff just seems like ancient history because of all the success that Georgia's enjoyed the last couple of years. But the last time Georgia lost at home, it was to South Carolina. It was heinous behavior there at the end. In fact, I'm going to show you a little bit of this on video, and I apologize for not having any kind of audio to necessarily match with this. But South Carolina fans behaved like, what was the thing the Phillies said? Act like you've been there before. South Carolina fans clearly have not been there before. Their program has won almost nothing of note ever. And so when they beat Georgia back in 2019, they're down there celebrating. The players much the same way. Also, no concept of acting like you've been there before because they literally hadn't. And so they're tearing up the hedges. They're doing all of that. It was a horrible scene. And Georgia fans were rightly enraged by the fact that South Carolina fans, wanted to just basically destroy property inside Sanford Stadium when that game was over. You'll remember that Ray Tanner, the then South Carolina athletic director, apologized to UGA for the behavior of his players and his fans. And, Kirby Smart was asked about that this week. And listen, as I said before, this is not a criticism of Kirby. This is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. Is that Kirby Smart, I think, sees as a coach games like that a little bit different because he looks across the field and he sees his friend and colleague Will Muschamp as the South Carolina coach. Brian McClendon was also on that staff. And so from Kirby's standpoint, I don't think emotionally something like that meant to him what it means to us, because when Kirby was asked about the whole thing going back to South Carolina from 2019, I think Kirby is able to laugh this off in a way that Georgia fans probably even all these years later still kind of don't want to laugh that off. This is what Kirby said about that this week.
Kirby, with Alabama's loss Saturday night, Georgia now has the longest home win streak in the nation, and I guess the last one was South Carolina. Did you use that as a reference point at all for your team about that was a team that kind of snuck up, I guess. They weren't real good that year. Did you bring that up, or did you talk about the home win streak at all?
No, I wouldn't want to give B-Mac and Will pleasure.
Now, once again, I'm not criticizing Kirby here. I'm not doing that because I think that line is funny, and I kind of get the idea that he makes $100 million. He lives in a different world than we live in. But Georgia fans, many of them anyway, are not quite ready to laugh about what happened there in 2019. They were enraged about it. In fact, let me go back to our show right after that game happened. Our buddy John Stinchcomb, who's a very measured guy, very I think well versed in kind of just sort of how to speak about things. He kind of reflects, I think, the mood of the fan base pretty well. I mean, this is what he said back in 2019 on DawgNation Daily about the destructive behavior of South Carolina that day. This was John. Now, this is not great audio quality because it's old, but nonetheless, it's John Stinchcomb from 2019 on our show. Pretty upset with South Carolina at the time.
You should be able to celebrate, and that's a huge win for their program. It's a huge win for Coach Muschamp. But destruction of property is never the answer. And I think there is a right way to win games, just like there's a right way, I guess, to lose them, which you try to stay classy. But I would expect the same from our staff. And, if we have a big win in somebody else's house, you have to know that destroying the other team's stuff is not the way to do it.
First of all, it's not like that's one of FDR's fireside chats. It's only 4 years ago. I don't quite know why it sounds quite so tinny like that. But nonetheless, that was John Stinchcomb. And I would say that one of my favorite kind of out-of-context lines that's ever been used on our show may be John Stinchcomb saying, hey, destruction of property is never the answer. Because that's what was needed to be said after that game against South Carolina. And by the way, it wasn't just sort of old heads like me and John who were saying that. At the time, a then Georgia commitment who's going to be a Georgia starter on Saturday, Nazir Stackhouse was on Twitter. And by the way, Nazir Stackhouse low-key is very funny on Twitter and always has been. But Stackhouse was on Twitter that day, and he was giving South Carolina a bunch of grief. So it's not just old heads like me and John who didn't like this. Nazir Stackhouse was a recruit at the time. Let me show you this on the screen. I'll read this. So he calls out Will Muschamp, who was the South Carolina head coach at the time, saying, wow, Muschamp, really? You're going to do the dogs like that? It says that's your own people. That was Nazir Stackhouse, who wasn't even at Georgia yet. He was just a commit, and back then he was also really funny on social media back then there as well, calling out South Carolina for what it did, calling out Will Muschamp in particular. So this doesn't mean the same thing to Kirby Smart as it means to a lot of the rest of us. We still have memories of that. In fact, most of us have sort of forgotten what losing even feels like, with the exception of this game against South Carolina, way back in 2019. So there is a degree to which, to Georgia fans with long memories, this sort of feels like something on Saturday where we're not quite ready to forgive. I mean, listen, the coaches that worked over there, and now they work over here, and I'm very happy about Will Muschamp being on the staff. I love Brian McClendon a lot. I'm very happy to have all of these guys kind of, repatriated? I'm sort of glad to have all these guys sort of repatriated back to University of Georgia. I don't have any grief, any beef with Muschamp or McClendon or anything like that. I really don't. This is one of those things where sometimes college football makes strange bedfellows. I was probably pretty mad at him that day, but I don't really care much about it anymore. But in terms of the whole idea of that hideous-looking South Carolina flag, that heinous behavior, Georgia fans not quite ready to ha ha ha, all is fair. Good day that day for Muschamp and McClendon. It's one of those things that sort of means a little bit more to the average Georgia fan than I think it means to Kirby Smart. And if you don't believe me, just let Nazir Stackhouse's words, back when he was still a recruit, let his words kind of hang in the air on that for a moment. So for Georgia fans, a little extra motivation on Saturday, whether Kirby Smart feels that or not. And that is Around the Doghouse, and it's poured today by our friends at the Finnish Long Drink. Now, I tell you, I think tomorrow is going to be such an amazing day in Athens, and I know many of you there too are just ready for one of those great all-day tailgates. I always judge the quality of the day based on how early the tailgate scene starts. And let me tell you something. Last Saturday, you could have pulled right up an hour before game time and gone right to your parking space. Tomorrow, that's not going to be the case. Tomorrow, tailgates are going to be going on all over the place in Athens, and so many of those tailgates right there in that cooler going to have that fresh, ice-cold Finnish long drink as a big part of that tailgate experience. And it's not just the traditional or the cranberry or the long drink strong or the long drink zero. It's the peach-flavored version of the Finnish long drink, because the peach-flavored version is the perfect thing for the peach state, but it's only available for a limited time. So if you haven't had your chance to try this yet, you got to go to thelongdrink.com. That's thelongdrink.com, and you can put in your zip code, and you can find out where you can pick some up today, because I'm telling you right now, you get that one of those great coolers fresh and ice cold. When you pick it out, you kind of dig down deep to get it out of the ice. You pop that top. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. For those of you that like mixed drinks, this is a mixed drink that comes ready for you. Just pop the top, and you're ready to enjoy it. So please find it online, thelongdrink.com. That's thelongdrink.com, and you can find and enjoy some finished long drink here today. So before we're done on today's program, last night, a great former dog – Michael Carville, our producer, is trolling us by going back to the South Carolina video. Listen, hey, I've told y'all before, I'm fine with a little bit of trolling. If this is what it takes to get, and if you're not watching a video, you don't know what we're seeing, but we're seeing these, South Carolina, morons acting like idiots. But if this is what it takes to get y'all frothing in the mouth for Saturday, that's fine. We'll throw some red meat on the grill here for a minute. Yeah, that's what they did to y'all in your own ballpark. How many years ago? 4 years ago? That's what they did to y'all in your own ballpark. We're going to let that stand? What's Saturday going to be like with that as a reminder? Because while that seems like a long time ago, that was just 2 trips ago, right? That was just 2 trips ago. They were here in 21, and then the one before that was the one all of this, nonsense happened in. So, yeah, use it for motivation. By the way, thank you to ABC and Columbia for providing the footage. But use it for motivation. Absolutely. Go out there and make that happen there on Saturday. I'm okay with that. It's probably a little trollish, but if that's what it takes to make Saturday what it needs to be, I'll play the role of Eric Ainge on that for a moment. But the point is, we're ready for a fun day, and a big part of all of that is what's going to go down with recruiting. Massive visitors on tap, and I mean that literally and figuratively. So let's find out all about it right now. Really fun recruiting conversation ahead of a big day for Georgia recruiting tomorrow. It's Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
It is a big one tomorrow. Sanford Stadium is going to be rocking. Recruits are there to see it. We got a list to kind of go through here for a moment, so let's bring in Jeff Sintel as we get ready to do all of that. Jeff, we've obviously had some fun with this already this week, and now I want to kind of sort of add some information to this here a little bit. And I guess let me start with what I think is the most interesting, and then we'll kind of work our way to what may be more relevant here in the moment. We'd been saying ever since the Bolden thing went down, KJ committing to Florida State back in the summer, that there would be no waving of white flags in this recruitment from us here on this show. We thought that Georgia would remain a factor in this recruitment. I believe that's still the case. I am certainly not saying that Bolden's coming to UGA, but I will tell you this, 7-figure NIL deals apparently don't buy what they used to, because that hasn't bought Florida State a level of exclusivity, apparently, with Bolden, who is, I think, reported to be in Athens tomorrow. So let's start with that. That gives you an idea of how big this game's going to be, right?
Yeah, Brandon, good morning. Eric Ainge, red meat on the grill. I love the way you're frothing on a Friday morning. Maybe it's not call-out Tuesday or whatever. It's not Separation Saturday. It's frothing Friday. I think recruits are going to visit. Recruits are going to visit. I think KJ Bolden and his exclusivity doesn't just extend to the Georgia Brown. I believe he's going to take an official visit to Auburn as well. Florida State's playing great, Brandon, and I'll be very honest. The NIL factor there, plus with the fact that the Noles look like a top 5, top 10 team, that leads me to believe it's going to be very hard to flip KJ Bolden. That having been said, I do think they're going to go down like Spartans in the movie 300. They're going to keep trying, even though the weeks and numbers and opportunities keep dwindling. I think this is going to be the 17th visit for KJ Bolden to Georgia. So, he's seen enough by now. He just wants to see a little bit more on Saturday.
So let's follow up on this, because I'm looking at YouTube. Light Dog 1968 says Bolden is just taking advantage of free tickets. He's not coming here. Jeff, I want to be as candid as I can be to set you up to be the same type of thing. There are plenty of recruits that just come to games because they get free tickets. That happens all the time. I believe we've probably seen at least 1 or 2 recruits in Athens here thus far that didn't look like they were having the world's best time being there. They were clearly just here to see a football game, and it wasn't any more than that. I don't think that's what this is with Bolden. Now, I also don't necessarily think that necessarily means he's flipping to Georgia. Hear what I'm saying and don't hear what I'm not saying. But a recruit who's been to Georgia 16 times previous, if he comes to a game like this on Saturday, that's clearly more than just free tickets to a football game. So while I can't guarantee what's going to happen with Bolden, I can flatly say to anybody, including Light Dog, who is a good commenter, I can flatly say this is more than just free tickets to watch a football game. Do you agree?
I think it's more in this era, Brandon. Not to sound really snarky or anything, but
heck, this might be just a visit that cements Georgia as the ideal transfer portal destination if things don't go down the way in Tallahassee the way he hopes them to. I know that sounds like I'm a little jaded or a little, trying to be a little whimsical or funny today, but sometimes that matters a lot. It matters a lot in this day and age. If anything falters with Florida State, I'm going to go back a long way with KJ. He told me when he was a freshman, ideal dream school was Florida State. That's where he wanted to go. He went to almost every camp they had back there as a kid growing up. So 16 visits is a lot, but he's probably taken 20-25 to Florida State at the same time. I think it's important because this is what it is. It gives you another chance to promote the Georgia brand to a very good football player. I mean, if you're in sales, you're going to try and win the Apple contract every year, if that's possible. You're going to try and go after the heaviest hitters because that's the scope of your program. So that's kind of what I see with KJ Bolden there.
I'm going to talk about Mekhi Boiro for a minute because we had some fun with this yesterday, and I like this for two reasons. Any guy who realizes the Gainesville, Florida's not the place he wants to live, that guy already goes up 9 notches in my book as it is. But in the case of Boiro in particular here, Jeff, I just really like him as a player. I'll take anybody off the Creekside roster. I just think that's an incredibly tough football team. Maurice Dixon's one of my favorite coaches. So I'll take a guy off that Creekside roster any day of the week. Also, this kind of dude here, and I'll never make anybody the next Jordan Davis because that's just so unfair. But this kind of dude who kind of does the Jordan Davis thing of a one-man run-stopping machine, Jeff, that is so valuable in this day and age of college football and really any day and age. Taking away the run is just a great strategic advantage for any kind of defense, and I believe that's what Boiro, certainly has a chance to do at the college level. I know Michigan's a factor here. I'm thinking there are other SEC teams. They're going to be a factor there as well, but how much does the decommitment from Boiro to Florida ahead of this Georgia visit, how much does this resonate within, kind of the UGA program here ahead of another guy that's going to be there on Saturday?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, Brandon, first of all, there's a lot of ways to take Boiro here, but I would simply say, first of all, everybody tap their brakes a little bit on Boiro simply because he told me face-to-face this week that he's not going to make his next decision, until early signing day. Michigan's a factor. I believe Auburn's a factor. Georgia's a big factor. He candidly admitted that he committed too early. He only took 2 officials. He wishes he would have kept the Michigan official. I think he'll look really strongly at Auburn, but around the program, and I'm glad you mentioned our good friend Maurice Dixon, because that guy needs a podcast. He's pretty funny, fun to be around. I love the way he relates to his players on the team, and members of the Creekside staff kind of told me this week that they always kind of thought Mountain Mekhi is what he's called. They always thought he sounded like or seemed like a Georgia guy. When he committed to the Gators, the Dogs did not relent, and in fact, they kind of amplified their pursuit of Boiro. He liked that. The other thing, it's just football, man. I don't know if you can say he's a Jordan Davis yet, which I'm glad you didn't. But he can be that John Atkins guy. He could be that guy. If you guys watch Georgia every week, the more Georgia can play in the box with 5 or the maximum of 6 guys in the box, and that can handle the run, that's one of the first steps in towards Georgia's championship defenses or just being the baddest team in the land, especially the baddest defense in the land. Mekhi Boiro told me, Brennan, he has one job. That is to knock the center in the back of the quarterback, knock the center back until he's basically falling down on the quarterback's toes. That's what he has to do. And everything else, with a great championship defense, you can build off that. And Brandon, check the film. 365, size 16 feet. His dad played in the NFL. He's about 6'4" and some change. They don't make many human beings like that. And that's why Georgia won.
Well, and I don't want to try to be an X's and O's expert because clearly I'm not. But, you go back and watch that Tennessee game from a year ago. Like, one of the things that allowed Georgia to be so successful in that game against Tennessee is that Georgia was quite content to play with like a lighter box up front, right? They didn't have to have as many bodies up front stopping the run. Now, they didn't have a Jordan Davis on last year's team. That sort of huge, gigantic space eater wasn't necessarily there, but Georgia still felt like it had enough beef up front that it could stop the run without having to throw like the extra body there at the line of scrimmage, which gave him much more opportunity to kind of send Javon Bullard on blitz plays or defend and make tackles against the Tennessee pass catchers. That all of that was made easier because Georgia didn't have to use manpower to stop the run because it trusted the beef that it had up front. That's why a guy like this is valuable to me. And I'm not trying to make him out to be the next Bednarik Award winner or something like that. I'm just trying to say that there's an element of this kind of player that recruiting rankings are always going to have a hard time properly evaluating because I don't know that stopping the run well, convincing teams not to run against you, I don't know that shows up in stat sheets, but I always want Georgia to be in play for the beefiest nose guard it can find. I just think that's one of the real building blocks of a very good defense.
Yeah, a good follow-up to that point is I don't think you need a first-round draft pick at nose guard, D-tackle to do that. There's a lot of guys in the Georgia program now, and I think Burrow could probably be one of those second-team, third-team, all-SEC type guys, and that's plenty good enough because Georgia's going to have the linebackers in the secondary and everybody else around the box that are going to look like those first-round draft picks. I mean, to me, Brandon, the thing with Burrow, you got to remember, why he's a three-star defensive lineman is because he weighed almost 400 pounds when most of the initial evaluations came out for him. He was like 390 recently. He's dropped a lot of weight. He's around the 360, 365 range. He's going to be in Athens on Saturday. He wants to see fan support. He wants to feel like home. He wants to feel energy. He wants to feel like he's part of the big crowd. He wants to feel like there's something more to this program than just winning a football game. And I certainly think the Dogs will deliver on all those fronts on Saturday.
And I'm going to tell you this, and then after this we'll talk about something different, because this kind of dovetails into something else here, Jeff. And, of course, I'm not exactly a neutral observer on this topic, but Florida's playing a bunch of players who are out of shape. If I'm a recruit and I'm looking at their lines of scrimmage and some of the guys that, and I want to be as kind here as I possibly can be, they don't look quite as good in their uniform as perhaps an SEC player possibly should. If I'm a bigger guy and I'm looking at the fact that Florida's tolerating some guys to probably have some weight that's not helping them play the game right now, that concerns me because it was Jordan Davis' ability to slim down at Georgia and play at an acceptable weight that kind of turned him into a first-round pick. And by the way, Jordan had a great night last night. It's that ability to take the big man and get him to be at his athletic best by being just a little bit slimmer that I think has been a calling card of Georgia's success. And I think that right now Florida's tolerating some guys on its lines of scrimmage who are just carrying some extra weight here. And if I'm a big guy, I don't want any part of that. I really, really don't. People can say, well, BA, you're not exactly unbiased. That's fine. But watch the game against Tennessee on Saturday and look at some of what you see there on that Florida line of scrimmage. Some of that just doesn't look good.
So here's a draw your own conclusions portion of DawgNation Daily today. I asked Makai about Florida. He said, well, felt pressured. He felt a lot of love. And they showed him a lot of nice cars on his official visit. That was kind of the reason why he chose Florida. I asked him to elaborate on why he might choose the Dogs. And he says Georgia's all about work. He wants that work. He needs that work to become the best player he can be. So if you're comparing the, shining, sterling moments of each program and their attention and their attraction to Burrow, you've got Georgia, hard work, make yourself better, develop. And you got a lot of nice cars, you got a lot of attention, and you really felt wanted and needed by Florida. That's basically how the scales tip each way in terms of Georgia versus Florida for him.
Let's talk about another guy. Interesting timing here that Aiden Breland, who's a major defensive line name to know, he drops his top three ahead of coming into Athens on Saturday. What can the game against the Gamecocks do to kind of sway a guy like Breland, who is a major, major target here at the moment?
Brandon, I've felt for a long time, if Georgia gets Breland back on campus for the South Carolina game, that the chances there go way, way up. So now I think the chances there are way, way up.
Well, that's what you like to hear right there. I want to ask you about Chris Cole here in a moment, his commitment from earlier this week. But prior to that, anybody from a visit standpoint I haven't asked you about that I should? You can broaden it out and just say anything else but the visit Saturday. Obviously, I think I've hit what I think are kind of the three more interesting names, but to kind of stretch it out a little bit more, what else are you kind of looking to see?
Five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin. Brandon, I think that's probably going to be one of your most popular names you will mention when you start focusing and fretting and zeroing in on 2025 guys. it hasn't been said, but there's just a feeling like Georgia and South Carolina are the two preeminent schools in that recruitment right now for the 5-star DL out of Savannah. I think that's big. Ethan Barbour is supposed to be in the house as well. He's got a September 22nd date right there coming up for his commitment. Back-to-back trips to Athens certainly sound nice for the program's chances there. I think those are the kind of the ones that stands out. Zion Grady, Brandon, out of Birmingham, a 5-star edge out of Charles Henderson Troy. He's starting to spend as much time in Athens as your family is this season, Brandon, so that's got to be a good sign. I think this will be his second trip in 3 weeks to check out Athens. He loves the development in Athens. He's got two main criteria, Grady told me. One, he wants to go to a place where he can be developed for the NFL. He gives Georgia a big check there. And the second place is he wants to go to a place that feels like home, where he's wanted. He already gives Georgia a big check mark there. So there's some more luminaries besides the obvious ones right there. Not much weight left to lift in the 2024 class, and I think really this is a weekend where Georgia cements itself with a lot of the best 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have plenty more time to talk about this in the future, but I think that 2025 is such an important recruiting cycle for Georgia when it comes to in-state recruiting. You know, offensive linemen like Juan Gaston, offensive linemen like Cortez Smith, and obviously, as you mentioned, Elijah Griffin, who's the biggest name of all to know, the defensive lineman out of Savannah. Clearly, there's nothing wrong with Georgia recruiting. They're recruiting at an unbelievable clip. They're number one right now in both 2024 and 2025. But I do believe, Jeff, that Georgia has a box to check in terms of really winning with the best in-state prospects of that class of 2025. I don't want to call it pressure. That's the wrong way to say it. But, man, it's a real opportunity to kind of clean up in your own state in a way that you really haven't done the last couple of years with some pretty high-profile misses there, high-profile names that look like they're going to get away. I think that 2025 is very important for Georgia when it comes to in-state recruiting. We've got plenty of time to talk about that, but the foundation for that kind of work does continue on Saturday.
Yeah, you know, the way I look at it, Brandon, we also must do our due diligence and remind folks that 4-star running back Nate Frazier, everybody saw DeAndre Swift last night on Thursday Night Football. I think Frazier is the most dynamic back that Georgia has brought in since DeAndre Swift and what he did last night for the Eagles. Highest rated back that Georgia has signed since Zamir White and James Cook in the 2018 class. This is his long-awaited official visit, Brandon. I bet I know that you love the fact that he said his official visit to Georgia after his commitment date. And that was kind of one of the ultimate tells where he was going to make his decision in like last month, and yet he had an official visit set for Georgia and kept that official visit set for Georgia, South Carolina for this weekend, which was certainly didn't look bad trying to figure out where he was going to go. I think Georgia's about 2 or 3 months ahead where they normally are for the 2024 class or the current class, and I think they were 6 months ahead 3 months ago without a lot of traction. And I think they're about 6 months ahead with the 2025 class as well. What they're doing is they're just working harder on these in-state guys. You mentioned Cortez Smith. I think that guy has long looked at Georgia as a place where he could thrive, and he's played a lot of great football. He gives me like whispers of Cedric Von Pron Granger already. And I'll tell you this, there was something at Georgia's camp this summer where he put a Georgia target on their back. And this is a player that Georgia really loved. And he put him on their back. And from that moment on, I think Cortez Smith has been a priority or a guy I need to know in the 2025 class. So there's a lot of stuff going on with 2025, and most of it with Georgia is really good, especially those top tier guys that they need to close out in the state. Juan Gaston is another guy, 6'8", 330. His father played basketball at Georgia Tech. If you're looking for a guy that can replace a lot of the things that Amarius Mims is doing for the Dogs right now, that's a good place to look.
Let's talk about Chris Cole's commitment going back to Sunday. The thing I like about this most is that, you know, you kind of weather the storm with him taking a visit to Tennessee over the weekend right before he makes the commitment announcement. Obviously, I think USC, it kind of emerged a little bit of a factor here, and yet ultimately Georgia's pitch wins out, even though they didn't get a chance to bat last on it. To me, that tells you about the recruiting apparatus that Georgia has going for it at the moment. But beyond that, what do you like about Cole coming into this Georgia class?
Brandon, I absolutely love Cole. A lot more than being the 7th highest rated guy in the class. This is an athletic skill set that you can say Georgia probably doesn't have yet on the program, at least in the linebacker room, when you consider his length and his ability to play multiple positions, rush the passer. Love this part about him. He's only made one B in high school. That was in Spanish. He wants to go into sports medicine after his career is over and be a doctor. And really, Brandon, his recruiting was pretty much wrapped up after his official visit that he took in June. Now, he did his due diligence, but really from the first time he stepped foot in Athens, it felt like home. The way everyone wants the program to shine for these All-American level recruits, that's the way Georgia impressed Chris Cole at every turn. It is another take a bow, take a lap, Glenn Schumann fist pump moment. The guy is as hot on the recruiting trail with his major targets as Tiger Woods was in his era, his prime era when he was facing the Tiger Slam. Glenn Schumann, if he identifies you and wants you, he usually gets you. This will be Cole's first game day visit. Also, his fellow member of the hashtag VA to GA movement, taking the best players from Virginia this year and making them dogs. The number one player in Virginia and the number two player in Virginia for this class are going to be in Athens on Saturday, and they're already both committed to Georgia. So Commonwealth State's not going to like Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann, but oh well.
I have kept you long here, so I want to squeeze in one final question. You had a couple great stories here at DawgNation this week, one of those involving Ethan Barbour, who you mentioned a moment ago. But the guy I want to talk about here in addition to that, the story about Nycar this week. You were down in Moultrie last week, or down, I forget if it's Leesburg or Moultrie, wherever the game was played between Cocke County and Lee County. And Nycar right now putting together an outstanding senior season. And for Georgia fans who want that elite receiver in this class and kind of feel that as kind of conquered territory for this program here at the moment. You know, it could be a guy like Carr already in the fold is actually growing into that role here right now, doing big things for the Packers down there. Also, pretty interesting story in terms of how he's evolving as a young man, too. Based on getting a chance to spend some time with him last week, what do you think Georgia's getting with Nycar right now?
Yeah, first of all, guys, go try and find a way to read that on DawgNation. Talk to your friend Google, because that was a unique story. First of all, big tip of the hat, big shout out to Nycar for being accountable and kind of sharing with me what he's went through. Also, the Colquitt County staff, Brandon. I'll be honest, this time a year ago, he was suspended from the team. And he when he looks back on those moments, he said he was being a turd. First of all, very rare to hear a young man call himself acting like a turd, and he needed to grow up, he needed to mature, he needed to focus. And he did every bit of that, Brandon. The first 4 games of his junior year, he was averaging 4 catches for 50 yards and no touchdowns. Not quite what a Georgia All-American commitment should look like. I think he was, in some aspects, spoiling or even flushing his future down the toilet. And then what he did is he swallowed the grow-up pill, the maturity pill is what I like to call it. He started going to class. He started getting in his books. He started practicing hard. He started acting like a leader. And since he made those changes in his life, Brandon, he's played the best football of his career. An average night is 7 catches, 120 yards, 1.7 touchdowns per game. It is a scintillating senior season. He is killing it. He is the terror of South Georgia right now, the way he's putting up numbers. But I really like, he's known for his evasive ability. I really like the major change of direction he made where I thought he was probably going to find himself out of the class. And now he looks like a guy that might wind up number 40, number 35, number 45 overall in the country as a prospect. I mean, Nycar has a great future, and very big shout-out here and appreciation to him for realizing it and not making sure that he didn't lose that.
Fun to think about that, Jeff. Really good stuff. Looking forward to seeing you in Athens tomorrow for Georgia and South Carolina. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend there, too. And we'll see you back here again next week at the same time on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger as well.
Yes, sir, Brandon. You got to remember, it's great to be back in Athens for a big game again.
Yep.
In Sanford, there really is nothing like it. I can't wait.
Yeah, can't wait too, Jeff. Good stuff. Thanks a lot.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So Jeff mentioned something kind of important there a moment ago, that last week was a pretty low-key day in terms of overall visitors on that particular Saturday. But one of the guys who was there was the 2025 tight end Ethan Barbour. And the fact that Barbour is going to be there last week, expect to be there this week, you certainly like that in terms of a guy making a commitment decision coming up in a few days, back-to-back visits to Georgia for game day for a tight end at Alpharetta. That could be a good sign there, kind of building on what we were also talking about, the need to really dominate in-state with your class of 2025. We hope to get a chance to see Georgia do just that. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll tell you, Royal Caribbean's got some really interesting new things coming to Perfect Day Coco Cay. Many of you know how much I love that private island in the Bahamas, and it's exclusive for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. It's literally like a private island at the middle of the sea, and the only way you can get there is on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. And they've had the thrill side, the chill side, where you've got like the tallest water slide in North America, and there's this whole wonderful like water park type scene on the one side. On the other side, you've got Oasis Lagoon and these wonderful beach locales and kind of like the relaxing side. Well, they're also adding a brand new adults-only section, like to Perfect Day Coco Cay, that's going to provide kind of an additional sort of beach club type opportunity. I was looking at some video of this. Jeff Santel actually shared some of this with me. It really is going to be an incredible thing. And so it's one of the reasons why I believe that you want to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I think the thing that sets it apart is Perfect Day Coco Cay and that wonderful private island experience. And by the way, this new add-on, this new kind of, build out there at Perfect Day Coco Cay, going to be ready in time for January when Icon of the Seas debuts there as well. So Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. That's jslater@dreamvacations.com, and she can tell you more about that. Now, as far as what I want to tell you more about, it's not a great slate for Saturday. We'll certainly acknowledge that, but there are a couple of games of note. And I want to give you a couple of, trends, a couple of lines as far as where these games are perhaps heading, and I'll give you my thought. We'll do more of this afternoon, this evening, on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, on our show a little bit later on this evening. But for now, Tennessee's at Florida. Number here is going to hover around 6.5 here this week. This is the large. Brad Powers, the great gambling expert, had this for us earlier in the week. This is the largest spread in favor of Tennessee in any game that's ever been played down there in Gainesville. They've never been more than a 3-point favorite at Florida, but right now they're around a touchdown favorite here in this spot. And keep in mind that for a Florida team that's not good, but last year in year one under Billy Napier, they were 5-0 against the spread as an underdog. So beating them easily when that's what teams were expected to do, Florida at least made that tough on its competition a year ago. So keep in mind that. Also keep in mind this, that our perception of both Florida and Tennessee a year ago was a huge imbalance in favor of Tennessee. It was a good year, broadly speaking, for Josh Heupel and the Vols. It was a bad year in Billy Napier's first year at Florida, but in the game played in Knoxville, Tennessee won that game by just 5 points. So I think you probably know where I'm heading with this. All of this suggests that right now I believe that Tennessee is slightly overvalued in this spot, and I do believe the version of Florida that we see is better than the one we all watched on August 31st when it was embarrassing itself against Utah. And you may say, well, BA, how can that be? Keep in mind what Florida did against Utah. A lot of the stuff that plagued them and kind of turned into a horrible defeat, it was correctable errors. It's having two number threes in the football field at the same time, which I laugh about, but it's the example, the kind of thing that hopefully after a couple of more weeks of practicing, you're not doing dumb stuff like that anymore. And frankly, a lot of those penalties can be kind of cleaned up. I'd be pretty surprised if Florida won this game, even though Dan Mullen this week's kind of put a little extra pressure on Billy Napier to kind of win a rivalry game at some point in time. This is something that even like going back to the Charlie Pell era, at least some Florida coach in his first year has won some sort of rivalry game against somebody. Last year, Billy Napier kind of got, the short end on that. So at some point in time, he needs to beat somebody. Don't think he's beating Tennessee on Saturday, but I would be surprised if this game isn't closer than the experts think it's supposed to be. LSU goes on the road as a 9.5-point favorite against Mississippi State on Saturday. This was not a good spot for the Tigers a year ago. They were 1-3 against the spread on the road against SEC competition in 2022. However, this is also a chance for LSU to show, once again, much like Florida, a chance for it to show that it is way better than what we all saw when they were getting beaten up pretty good against Florida State. Obviously, that was the case. This is a Mississippi State team that last week needed to go to overtime against an Arizona team that it had destroyed. A year ago in Tucson, Mississippi State's beating Arizona 39-17. A year later, and we all know what that program's been through. Obviously, the loss of life for its coach, Mike Leach, but on the football field here for a moment. So what was a 39-17 win on the road was an overtime win for Mississippi State at home last week against a team that's just 5-7 a year ago. That's a tough spot here. I think that Zach Arnett likely to struggle in his first year at Mississippi State. They're trying to change over their offense. Keep in mind, Will Rogers was a record-setting quarterback for Mississippi State, but this is a guy who in the entire season thus far has thrown the ball about as much as he would have thrown it in a single game a year ago. So they're in the midst of a really weird offensive transformation. I think that hurts them. And I still think that LSU can be a really good football team. I do. And if there's any hope of that being right, then flexing a little bit on the road at Mississippi State seems to be the kind of place something like that would come to fruition. I talked a little bit yesterday about Kansas State at Missouri. Admittedly, this is the kind of game that most people don't care about. But in this spot, when Missouri's kind of, sort of a underdog of a small number of points, they've actually performed pretty well. 4-1 in its last 5 against the spread as a home underdog of a touchdown or less. So this is a spot where Missouri can be dangerous, but they haven't beaten a Power 5, team, non-conference wise since September of 2019. Kansas State on the other side of this is the reigning Big 12 champs, for goodness sakes. They're also 3-1 their last 4 against the spread against SEC competition. There's a part of me that doesn't understand this line. I frankly don't see why Missouri's only a 4.5-point underdog. Yes, I know they're at home. Perhaps this isn't the same kind of Kansas State team as it was a year ago, but to me, everything about this just sort of screams Kansas State for the most part. And so it makes me a little nervous that the point spread here doesn't quite reflect what I think we're all seeing with our own eyes. My pick here is Kansas State. I'm going to take a minus the points on the road. But it makes me a little nervous that somehow somebody somewhere seems to know something that I don't. They typically do. Very quickly here on a couple of other games, Arkansas is a 9.5-point favorite hosting BYU, playing without its top running back, Rocket Sanders. Here's my expectation for Arkansas. I believe Arkansas wins this game. I think it's inside the spread. This will be closer than the experts think. I think what Arkansas is trying to do right now is I believe they're intentionally trying to play slower as a way of helping a defense last year that was a horrible, horrible Achilles heel for this program. Sam Pittman needs wins however he can get them. They're going to run KJ Jefferson a lot in this game. They're going to try to play defense. They're going to limit possessions. This is a lower scoring game than experts think it's going to be, and I believe it's a recipe for Arkansas to win, but perhaps not as spectacularly as the point spread suggests that they might. And then I'll also give you this on the really continuing to be probably biggest story in all of college football. That's Deion Sanders in Colorado. They play as a 22.5-point favorite against Colorado State. This is actually the first time this rivalry's been played since 2019, strangely enough. And in the 10 previous matchups prior to that, Colorado's actually 9-1 against the spread in its last 10 against its in-state rival Colorado State. Many of you know that Jay Norvell, the Colorado State coach, has actually kind of called out Deion Sanders this week, made fun of him for wearing sunglasses and a hoodie during interviews. Here's the one thing I think we know. We know that opposing coaches don't like Deion Sanders. They're not going to admit this publicly, but we know many of them don't like Deion. And it really doesn't have anything to do with sunglasses or anything like that. It's about them devoting their entire life to college football and Deion perhaps stepping onto the scene and maybe making the coaching process right now look a little bit easy. Now, we also have the belief that college football didn't magically get easy overnight, so eventually it gets hard for everybody. And Deion's going to face some adversity at some point in time, but right now, through 2 weeks, he's made it look pretty easy. There's a natural allergy to that on the part of coaches of who's this guy to step in here and think he's going to make college football look easy. So when Jay Norvell complains about Deion's sunglasses, what he's really complaining is the level of attention Deion's getting through 2 weeks. But the thought is, well, this is going to give Colorado extra motivation on Saturday. Perhaps it does. The week after that, it's Dan Lanning in Oregon. Remember, Lanning took a pretty big shot at Colorado on the event of Colorado leaving the Pac-12 to go to the newly formed Big 12. So maybe it's extra motivation for Colorado 2 weeks in a row. I think over the course of these next couple of weeks, we're also going to find exactly what Colorado is all about right now. Clearly, this is a far better team than it was a year ago. The transfers, the presence of Shedeur Sanders, the presence of Travis Hunter are clearly changing all of that and making that the case. But how much better are they? We'll find some of that out. Can they get another easy win against Colorado State? Can they stay competitive with Oregon? Next couple of weeks should tell you something there. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. couple of other things really quickly here for a moment on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. First of all, how about a shout-out last night for an amazing performance by the Philadelphia Eagles running back DeAndre Swift, back in his hometown, of course. 28 carries, 175 yards. Love to see that. DawgNation on Twitter last night. What a performance from DeAndre Swift. He looked like he was back at Georgia when he was playing for the Eagles on Thursday night, and yes, he did, DawgNation. You are right about that. I love to see it. A lot of Georgia fans have become Eagles fans because of the presence of so many former Dogs in that roster. But I was also thinking about this, and I just want to make this point kind of quickly. Think about how long it's been since Swift was playing at Georgia. 4 years ago, right? His last season here was 2019. And the best year of DeAndre probably came in 2018 for a team that won the East and really came very close to making the college football playoff. But here's the thing we've all got to be careful for. Like, I think we've all got to start trying to put on our historian hat a little bit when we can, because it's going to become very easy in the future to sort of remember guys on the 2017 team, Georgia's first SEC championship under Kirby Smart, its first trip to the college football playoff, the Roquans, the Chubbs, the Michelles. A guy like DeAndre Swift was just a third-team running back on that team. Now, he had the clinching touchdown in the SEC championship, so he was a part of that story, but that wasn't really his team. His team was sort of more 2018, and that was a very good team, but it didn't quite have the same hardware, certainly, that Georgia would get the last 2 years of winning the national championship. But is DeAndre Swift one of the best players that's played for Kirby Smart? I think he absolutely is. That 2018 team, his season in 2018, alongside Elijah Holyfield, who was also terrific that year, I think it's something that's really important for us to remember. And this is one of those things that just human nature, it's going to get harder to do some of this. As Georgia has more and more good teams, populated by more and more very good players, the sheer volume of the talent that's come through here, some of this is going to become over the course of time. Not quite tomorrow, but 5 years from now, perhaps, some of this is going to become a little bit more difficult to remember. So work really hard to make sure you don't forget. A guy like DeAndre Swift, how good he is now for the Eagles, helps us remember how good he was at Georgia. And when you think about the great moments you've seen the Kirby Smart era, obviously 2017 and 2021 and 2022, those moments are going to dominate a lot of that conversation here right now. But let's not forget, the performance that Swift had going on the road against Kentucky in 2018 in a game that clinched the SEC East. Other things there as well. This is a very good player who probably didn't have the same kind of end-of-season success that other Georgia players have had, but when you think about the greats to kind of come through here during the Smart era, hopefully DeAndre Swift will be prominently mentioned there on all of that. Also, before we kind of wrap up and play our music, I got 4 golden shoes today, so let me give you all of those, and then we'll get ready to fire up the fight song and close it out for today. Our buddy Mad Dog leads us off here in honor of the South Carolina game on Saturday. Actually, Bubby Dean, I'm going the wrong order here. Bubby Dean leads us off here because Bubby wanted to let us know that he's got his tickets for the DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. You love to see that. Bubby giving you the hashtag #GoFor3 in 23. Better never rest. You love all of that. And Bubby, we're glad you're going to be on board with us for DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. One of those lucky enough to get in before it's sold out. Bubby, that's good news. For those of you in the waiting list, we'll try to see if we can get you on if we can. Obviously, won't be room for everybody, but hopefully some room for a little bit more here at DawgNation.com. Bubby, that's a great thing to see. Our next golden shoe goes the way of Georgia on Tap, who says that right now Alabama's on the same page as DawgNation Daily, hashtag Gator Hater, because when you see Alabama this week, they're playing actually at South Florida on Saturday, and in their training room, I guess, they had a whole gator in there. They're actually eating gator this week. Mike Rodak reporting that Bama was serving alligator in its cafeteria tonight before its game at South Florida on Saturday. Jalen Key had shared this on Instagram. So there you go. And that's about how torn up and ripped up the Florida Gator is going to be, the lousy, stinking Gator, when Georgia goes there in October. Georgia on Tap, well-earned golden shoe for you. We appreciate you sharing that. Next golden shoe here, coming the way of Joshua Campbell, who says, Bama fans have had a hard time since last Saturday. Could be a long season for the Gumps. And you see a very sad person there, and the caption says, Bama fans, when they ride by a Texas Roadhouse or a Longhorn Steakhouse. Yeah, those restaurants right now, Bama fans won't be eating at those anytime soon. No doubt about that. They're pretty disappointed right now about the Texas Longhorn situation. So any restaurant that reminds them of that, they're not going to like that either. And I believe we have one more to give you here. This is our buddy Mad Dog, who says, I can't wait for Mekhi Muse, a.k.a. Mighty Mouse, to introduce himself to the Gamecocks on Saturday. Beat the Gamecocks. Go Dogs. Sick 'em. Good stuff there from Mike the Mad Dog. We will give him a golden shoe there for that. Well-earned indeed. And all kinds of great golden shoes as we wrap things up here on a Friday to put us in the right mood We kind of like to give you that Friday shoes dump sometimes to go into the weekend to kind of create the right vibe for Georgia and its SEC opener against South Carolina on Saturday. So here's the scene for us. Kaylee will have you for the pregame show tomorrow. That'll be some really good stuff. Then after the game, I will see you in the UGA bookstore for our DawgNation postgame show. So keep in mind, you want to share your thoughts about the game, come and see us. We'll get you on the air as quick as we possibly can. You can give us a couple of thoughts on that game. Georgia fans want to hear from you, so be there in person with us at the DawgNation postgame show at the UGA bookstore for more on that. Also, our Zoom calls are back working again, so we'll be able to take those with you tomorrow there as well. You can join us. If you can't be in Athens, you can join us where you are. And we need some good Georgia fans weighing in with some strong thoughts on what they see, so we will invite you to do just that on Saturday. DawgNation postgame show coming to you from the UGA bookstore after the game. Lousy stinking Gators. They got a tough one on Saturday against Tennessee. Even harder 43 days from now against the Georgia Bulldogs. That is our Gatorator countdown. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy the game Saturday. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. All right, let's get your comments. And we'll try to do a good full run on the comments here to wrap it up on a Friday, so we'll have some fun with that. Okay, here we go. So here I am. By the way, this is a reasonable facsimile of me, not the real me. He says, you laughed at me when I picked Texas a playoff team. Who's laughing now? There's still time to jump on the bandwagon. Texas is back, baby. Yeah, listen, I feel okay about the Texas playoff pick. And, I jokingly say this sometimes. I think I got this from somebody else. But when you lose, say nothing. When you win, say even less. So I'm going to let you all figure out when I'm right, when I'm not. And look, clearly there's some ego here where you want to get your picks right. I mean, I'm very biased in favor of Georgia and biased against Georgia rivals. But when it comes to making picks, I want to get my picks right. I mean, ultimately, the thing that drives me probably more than anything, because I'm a man or a human being like any of y'all are. I mean, there's a certain level of ego. You want to get your picks right, but I'm also humble enough to know that, over the course of the long haul, almost no one's going to do much better than 50-50. And if you think you do, that means you're probably a bad record keeper. It's probably more than anything, probably what you are. Yeah, I mean, obviously right now that pick's looking pretty good. So we'll see if it continues that way. And funny stuff from Michael Carvel to share that. All right, let us take some YouTube comments here. CrowKing123 says, curious to see how Texas handled the hype. Yeah, we'll find that out here the next couple of weeks. Obviously, that's been the issue. It's kind of the letdown game. But, I think it's important to note that, you saw 2 quarters of Quinn Ewers against Alabama a year ago, and he played pretty well. Texas played pretty well there, too. So this isn't just some sort of fluky win that Texas gets on the road at Alabama. The 6 quarters that Alabama has played with Quinn Ewers at quarterback, Texas looked really good in all of those. So, I think that you will say, well, Texas had a hard time showing up from week to week. Yeah, that's been the case. But in terms of the kind of thing that very few teams can do, which is play at an elite level, Texas in 6 quarters with Ewers against Alabama has shown you their ability to do that. Scott Mitchell says he's excited to watch Buford tonight. Yeah, it's Carver, Atlanta tonight. That's a pretty fun team. We're going to have Buford on TV coming up in a couple of weeks. We've got Marist, Blessed Trinity tonight. David Jacobs' son for Blessed Trinity, by the way, an amazing pass rusher, just a freshman. That's going to be a big-time showcase. But yeah, Buford tonight against Carver should be a really fun game. Let's see what else. Julian Harris says he combined Dr. Pepper strawberries and cream with long drink peach, and that caused him to travel into the future. And he saw that dog fans caused 3 false starts against South Carolina Elite. Julian, I'm glad to know that you found a portal into time, and glad to realize that a couple of our sponsors can help you do that. That's very funny. DMar42 says Texas and Florida State have been the most impressive teams through 2 weeks, but show me 12 games. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair to say. I mean, the reason why early season games sometimes can be misleading is because a player can win a game for you, but it takes a roster to win a championship. And so when a big player has a big performance early in the season, well, that can lead to a big win. But over the course of your year, it's the roster that's really put to the test. And there's no doubt that Florida State's got a few really big-time players. Jordan Travis at quarterback, Keon Coleman, the transfer wide receiver. The other wide receiver's pretty good there too. So there's no doubt they've got the presence of some really big-time players. But if you care about, like, say, blue chip ratio and things like that, the overall roster for Florida State, we're led to believe, probably not quite as strong as some of the other ones that are out there. So we may see a strain on that Florida State roster at some point in time this year that's not necessarily unearthed in just one big game against a team like, say, LSU. Because here's the other thing. Clemson may not be that good anymore, but they're still pretty tough to beat. And a team in the ACC like Miami, I mean, we talk a lot about the disappointment of Texas A&M, but the flip side of that coin is that Miami actually looked pretty good last week. And so if you're Florida State, I do believe you sat up and took notice of the Miami win against Texas A&M because Miami kind of looked like the real deal in beating Texas A&M the way that it did. Way better on offense than it has been. And Van Dyke, the quarterback who did not transfer to Alabama, staying at Miami, another one of these quarterbacks that apparently just didn't want to be in the SEC, not even for potentially big bucks. You know, his decision to stay at Miami looks like a pretty big deal right now. So if your point is, hey, I want to see how Florida State looks over the course of 12 games, that's a very fair point, and at least one of those games seems way tougher now than it probably would have before the season began, the Miami game here. Jonathan Aaron says that Saban was on the McAfee show. I guess he's going to be on every week. I had heard this. This is another one of those things that Saban does that Kirby would never do. I mean, can you imagine if I went to Kirby and was like, hey, can you come on my show every Thursday? And maybe 10:35, we'll pencil you in there on that. I mean, can you imagine saying that to Kirby Smart? And it's not just because it's little old me. Kirby Smart's not doing anybody's show every Thursday. He's just not. And yet Saban's doing the McAfee show every Thursday. Now, some of that, play both sides here, some of that may be, well, Saban's just a little bit more media savvy than Kirby Smart is. And perhaps he is. There's a level of favorable coverage that Saban seems to get that Kirby doesn't seem to get. Saban playing the game with the media probably helps him with that. Kirby does not play the game with the media, and therefore, you know, sometimes it doesn't quite work out your way. Whether it should or whether it shouldn't, that just seems to be the truth. That Saban gets a degree of favorable coverage, and you can't help but notice that he has been more than happy to grant access to a lot of media types, perhaps as a way of fostering some of that. But on the other side of this, doesn't this sort of look like an audition for like College Game Day? I mean, he's on TV every week or streaming internet, whatever the McAfee show is, you know, kind of primarily thought to be. He's on media every week. He just bought a house down in Jupiter, Florida, which the average age of resident is like 71, with the exception of all the PGA Tour golfers that live down there. I mean, boy, this does not scream at a guy chomping at the bit to figure out who his next quarterback after Jalen Milroe is going to be. I'm just telling you, it does not. And I know he's kind of pushed back against some of the retirement stuff, but you know, I don't know. I don't know. There's certain things I want to say that I'm not going to say in terms of people kind of holding on longer than they should. But boy, it just does not quite feel like, you know, Saban is just exactly chomping at the bit for the next phase of his coaching life. Matt Presley says, do I anticipate more involvement from Bowers and Arian Smith this week? Relatively quiet to start the season. Yeah, I do believe that Georgia's going to try to push some more buttons this week than it has in the past. I could see it going to Bowers early, establish the big lead, and then, you know, you kind of go to something else after that. Because ultimately, Georgia wants to see what it has in addition to Brock Bowers, I truly believe. So if you want to keep this to just Bowers for a moment, they may use Brock, get him a couple of touchdowns because you kind of want to give him his moments, especially after last week. Bowers was mad at himself for a couple of drops. I mean, he should have had at least one more touchdown on Saturday, and it was he would say this. It was his fault probably. So he was mad at himself. So I'm sure they want to probably do him a solid, give him a chance to get that bad taste out of his mouth because being down the field last week's game, you know, Bowers looked like he was about ready to rip his face mask off. He was so mad at himself. So I could see them going to Bowers early as a way of kind of building the lead that Georgia wants to have, and then sort of seeing what else it has beyond that. You know, the Arian Smith thing. You know, I hope that's the case. I think the rotation at wide receiver should be interesting to see. Let me do a couple more here on YouTube, then I'll bounce over to Facebook. By the way, Alan Verbanchik has traveled over to the YouTube side of things. Good to see him over there today. Spencer Clark, looking forward to seeing Kendall Milton on Saturday. He says, finally got that dog stiff arm. I love a good stiff arm, man. I love that. That's one of my favorite things to see. Nature Gator defending against some of the flabby Florida players. So there you go. Oh, Alan Rabanchi is on YouTube because he's in Facebook jail. Well, Alan, I am certainly sorry about that. Jeremy Harbin says the screen that Bowers dropped probably would have been a touchdown too. Nothing but green grass and blockers in front of him. Yeah, I mean, Bowers was enraged at himself, and like he's a mild-mannered guy. He would never be as mad at somebody else as he was him. At least I don't think anyway. He would never be as mad at somebody else as he was at himself in that particular moment. It's kind of funny to see. Jonathan Aaron says Bowers dropping those passes almost made him look human. Yeah, it was shocking, right? It was like, I mean, it was like this audible gasp of, I can't believe Brock Bowers dropped a pass. And, I mean, Bowers doesn't think of himself as superhuman, but the rest of us do. It was shocking. It's kind of like the thing of, like, Superman ran into a little bit of kryptonite or something like that. Kind of like one of those deals. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark also mentioned that Malachi Stark's front squat 315, clean press 275 at only 205 pounds is unreal. Yeah, that level of strength is crazy for a body that small, which 205 is not small, but you know what I'm saying. And like, can you imagine what that must feel like? That level of strength, like compacted, and Malachi's probably not like just the head ripping safety that Georgia's had with some other guys, but you still don't want that running full speed at you. You just don't. That kind of power packed into a relatively smaller package. All right, let me pop over here and get some Facebook comments. I think the science of strength and conditioning is really interesting. Now, I'm by no means an expert on it, as you can clearly look at me and tell. But, I mean, that's what's so cool about, like, this age of college athletics is, like, they can build these bodies, man. They can do it. And they'll tell you to eat this, do this, and there's a certain level of, science that they've just sort of figured out. And Georgia's not the only program that's going to figure it out. But, I mean, these very, very young, athletic bodies that are full of potential to begin with, but still there's a way in which you get even more out of that when you go from the top 20% to the top 2%. That is just such a massive change, and there are so many Georgia players that just really reflect that. Rick Martin says Javon Bullard being out is going to hurt UGA. It is. Hopefully you can have an elite showing defensively without him. Hopefully that's the case. But he was arguably your most important player in the college football playoff and in the postseason a year ago. So hopefully he'll be back soon when Georgia really needs him. Mike Flapjack Williams says, do you think the Bobo criticism came from PTSD from the offensive teams between 2015 and 2017, back when Gurley had the longest pass of the season? So I think the Bobo criticism is complicated. Like, on the one hand, I thought it was totally overblown after the UT Martin game. And I think some of the criticism of Bobo when he was here for the first time was probably overblown there as well. But on the other hand, I think some of this also speaks to the high expectations that Georgia has for its offensive coordinator position after Todd Monken did this job for 3 years. And this is the thing that you're kind of touching on, which I just think is really very important, which is prior to Monken being here, Georgia had not had what I would think of as an elite play caller, even predating Kirby Smart getting here. Smart had Jim Chaney. Chaney had a couple of pretty good years, but it wasn't a wowing offense. And obviously James Coley was beneath the standard the position requires. But Brian Schottenheimer, the 2015 offensive coordinator, was the worst of the bunch. So there is a lacking presence with that offensive coordinator that had existed with this program for a little while prior to Todd Monken getting here. And Monken getting here changed it just like that. And I think we should try to forget as much as we possibly can about 2020. It's probably the worst year most of us have ever had. But the one thing that was evident even in 2020 that you should go back and examine is that Georgia fans knew they had a good offensive coordinator that year. the sort of knee-jerk reaction criticism. Monken didn't get any of that year. Georgia lost a couple of games. Monken didn't get any criticism that year. Georgia fans, I think, were pretty happy with Todd Monken as offensive coordinator, even though they didn't know then how good it would turn out to be with Stetson Bennett 2 years later, over the course of the next 2 years after that. They didn't know, but the kind of like knee-jerk criticism that Bobo got after week one, Monken didn't get any of that on this show, and we chronicle Georgia fans, I think, pretty well here. We have certainly enough of them that tune in. Monken didn't get any of that during the 2020 season. People knew that Monken was a good offensive coordinator. And the standard that Monken set over the course, certainly of the last 2 championship years, is so high that while I think the talk about Bobo is totally overblown after the UT Martin game, I think that his previous tenure here has largely been misremembered by a lot of people. I think it was better than sometimes he's given credit for. The angst that people have about the Georgia offense is they know that, to go back to our topic off the beginning of the show, even if Georgia does have, to use Shane Beamer's line, a really freaking good defense, even if that's the case, you have still got to be top 10-ish offensively or you're not winning the national championship. If Georgia hovers back around 35, 36 points per game, 37 points per game here this year, they will probably not win the national championship and they might not make the college football playoff. There's just a big difference between like that extra touchdown a game, that extra, few points per game. There's just a big difference in that. And Todd Monken was really good at giving that to Georgia. And Mike Bobo does have big shoes to fill. And I don't think this is going to be an issue. I think that Georgia's going to be fine offensively on Saturday and moving forward. But if that doesn't happen, if Georgia, let's say Georgia scores 31 points on Saturday, something like that, 35, 36, 37 points on Saturday, somewhere in the 30s, let's say they're somewhere there, then it is going to allow people to kind of creep up and think more about what Georgia used to be like offensively before Todd Monken got here. I think that's fair. I do. Let's see what else. Keith Foles says that Bobo's previous offenses were some of our best. That's true. I felt like Georgia was in good hands when Mike Bobo was offensive coordinator. Now, there were obviously moment-to-moment type things where you wish you would have done something differently, but I don't try to lose my mind about one individual decision. Now, if it's at the very end of the game and it costs you the game, I guess you probably do. But even like the blunder near the end of the first half against UT Martin, if you follow me around all day long, I make probably thousands of decisions, and if you highlighted a couple of them, some of them look really dumb. Like in a given moment, I'll do something in my life, and if you were watching, be like, how could that idiot be so dumb? And I think some of that's just the sheer mathematical fact of you make enough decisions, a couple of them are going to be bad. Coaches over the course of a game make enough decisions that some of them every now and then are just going to be bad. It's just probably hard to avoid. Mitchell Proctor says the kicking game, I should say, has looked a little shaky early on. Hope we can see more consistency and confidence by the end of the season. Yeah, so this goes back to what we said earlier this week, which is I believe that Georgia, and this is just my best guess, I'm probably kind of making this up, but I still think I'm directionally right. I believe that Georgia is really challenging itself from a special team standpoint because they are facing Beamer ball on Saturday. And I believe that, Georgia wants to pull out every stop that it possibly can. And being the best special teams unit on Saturday, given the fact that Kirby this week said that South Carolina has been the league's best special teams unit, whether that's true or not, that's what Kirby said. Given the fact that that's present here on Saturday, I believe the challenge is probably issued to Georgia to go out and be the best special teams unit on the field, which obviously includes the kickers too. Let me do DawgNation.com here for a moment. Frogger 2000, we did discuss the Stetson Bennett situation a little bit yesterday. I mean, obviously, we're not going to speculate much beyond what the Rams have reported, that it's a non-football injury. The quotes from McVay, kind of give you a little bit more context there, the fact that this is not related to the shoulder injury that he dealt with during the preseason. So people are going to, make their own conclusions there about that. We're going to really avoid trying to do anything like that. But the one thing that I did say yesterday, I'm happy to repeat right now, is that whatever non-football thing that it is, Stetson's absolutely worthy of our prayers here, right? Because if something away from the game is taking him away from the game, then that's all we need to know to pray for him, whether we know what it is that's taking him away from the team right now or not. So we don't need to know all the facts here to know the context of the story, which is something not involving football, has taken since have been away from football, and that's enough for me to say I'm praying for him, and whatever this is, I hope that he can find a happy conclusion to it at some point in time in the future. And we mean that sincerely. We really, really do. And I guess that's about all I feel like I need to say there on that, and that's pretty much what we said on yesterday's show. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says, how many offside illegal procedures will the crowd cause tomorrow? Yeah, I mean, I actually was going back and rewatching some of the Georgia-Tennessee game the other day, and it was just sort of fun to see how frequently that happens. So, yeah, give me 3, 4, 5 of those. That'd be fun to see. Bob Zamblin checks in to say that I hope McConkey can get healthy soon, but the reserves are picking up the slack and next man up mantra, go Dogs. Yeah, I don't expect McConkey's day to be tomorrow, I don't think. But I certainly hope to have him back sooner rather than later. This is a very important player, but as Bob says, while he's gone, the app becomes an opportunity for somebody else to kind of get in there and potentially make some plays. I think you're right about that. DT, critical of me, saying I give the DawgNation website table scraps the R.S. Andrews school down. Well, DT, I am very sorry about that if that's been the case. We will try not to do that. We'll try not to do that. JP says, now, to be fair, though, DT, I actually started on DawgNation.com one of the days this week. Now, I think that was probably yesterday. So while I'll wear some of that criticism, I do believe I started on this side one of the days this week. JP says that some of the issues our offense has had earlier this year are more on Beck's decision-making than on Bobo. Missed Bowers twice last week for touchdowns because he made rush decisions when he had time. Maybe that's the case. Hopefully there won't be much of a need to play the blame game after Saturday. JP also mentioning C.J. Smith. I like Smith, man. I think he looks like a player. I like him a lot. BMAC says, well, Georgia scored in the first quarter. They need to. This is one they desperately need. They need to get off the faster start. I was saying this to our 1st and 15 audience a little earlier. Somebody pointed out to me that I misunderstood Jake Fromm on the show last week, that he was talking about being nervous not for the Mississippi State game, but for the Samford game before that, a game that I just completely had no memory of whatsoever. I was thinking the next game for Jake was against Mississippi State, the one after Notre Dame, but it was against Samford, which actually makes what Jake said then easier to understand. I just completely misunderstood him 2 weeks ago. I think the overall point's still the same, which is against the Bulldogs in that first SEC start. Jake came out. You have the flea flicker to begin the game. Wide open Terry Godwin, but it's the big pass play throw, and everything else settled in after that, and Georgia went on to wallop Mississippi State, something that day that most people did not think Georgia was going to do. A lot of people thought Georgia might be ripe for an upset there that day. So I do believe, I called for a faster start last week, didn't quite get it, but Saturday is a very good day to have a good day. Saturday would be a very nice time for Carson Beck to get off to a fast start. Diedrich Frazier says Todd Monken's given Georgia its blueprint and offensive identity for years to come. I think that's true, but I do think, though, Diedrich, and I think you got to be careful here. It used to be that when I would post the show to the website, there was this I would like copy and paste something from one site, there's this little boilerplate language at the beginning of the post, and I would just copy it over day after day after day after day from one post to the next, one post to the next, one post to the next. Website doesn't function this way anymore, but it used to be that if you copied the same text too many times, eventually the file kind of got, the code kind of got corrupted. And I don't really understand this. I don't know anything about coding at all. But the coding around that text would eventually get corrupted and it actually mess up the whole post. And you could go on the back side of the website, you could sort of see this, that the whole thing had been messed up because this code, after pasting it so many times, had finally gotten corrupted. Now, I believe that a college football team works the exact same way. And I think you see two instances in which this is true. I think you see it at Alabama, and I think you see it at Clemson. Now, you see it worse at Clemson, but you see it some in Alabama too, where, Dabo said before this year began, hey, we run the Clemson offense. Now, Garrett Riley's our offensive coordinator, but we run the Clemson offense. Now, you say, okay, the Clemson offense was probably established by Chad Morris, and then Chad Morris gave way to, Tony Elliott. Who else was Jeff Scott? You kind of have those guys that are there, and eventually you get to Brandon Streeter, and with all due respect to Streeter, who's on the Georgia staff now, Clemson offense just wasn't quite functioning the same way. You had kind of copied and pasted the same code year after year after year, but at a certain point in time, it just doesn't quite get copied over quite as well, and now the Clemson offense is a far cry from what it once was, even though they're using the same blueprint that I guess Chad Morris, made famous there. I think you're seeing a version of that at Alabama too. They've changed offensive coordinators a lot, but supposedly the same basic tenets of the offense have remained the same. That's what we've been told anyway. I'm not expert enough to say with my own eyes whether that's true or not, but that's what we've been told. And I think that transition from, at one point in time it was Lane Kiffin, then it became Brian Dable, then it became Mike Loxley, then it became Steve Sarkisian after that, and now it's Bill O'Brien, then it's Tommy Reed, now it's Tommy Rees. At a certain point in time, pasting that same code year after year after year, it just seems to lose something. So I definitely want Georgia to run the Todd Monken offense this year, right? Whatever comes to mind when you think that. I definitely want Georgia to run the Todd Monken offense this year because the Todd Monken offense has worked so well the last couple of years, and a lot of these are the same players. But if you say moving forward 3-4 years from now, the Todd Monken offense is the blueprint that Georgia's always going to use. I can't explain why this is true, but we have real-life examples in college football that eventually trying to copy and paste that same code year after year, eventually you do sort of lose something. And eventually you need kind of a guy to be able to cook the meal, to mix metaphors here, to be able to kind of cook the meal the way that he wants to, and that becomes your best chance to be successful. I wouldn't reinvent it now, but at a certain point, a little bit of a Georgia offensive reinvention is probably going to be necessary because other programs kind of show you that here at the moment. Randy Hall says, how about my prediction for Tennessee, Florida? I believe that Tennessee wins. I believe that Florida keeps it closer than the experts think. And if Tennessee's not careful, Florida could win the game. I don't think Florida's going to be 2-10. A lot of folks, I think, overreacted to the loss to Utah. Florida's not going 2-10. At worst, they're 5-7. At best, they may only be 6-6, but at worst, they're 5-7. Florida's going to find some wins somewhere. Tennessee had a hard time pulling away from Florida in its own stadium a year ago, and Tennessee was way better than Florida was last year. Right now, I don't see a Hendon Hooker walking through that door for Tennessee. And we may laugh at Tennessee fans who think that Hooker should have been a Heisman finalist, but the fact they even have any argument at all in that direction lets you know that Hooker at least had a very good year. Right now, Joe Milton's not that same caliber of quarterback. It specifically shows up in the area of accuracy. Milton is just not as accurate a quarterback as Hendon Hooker is, and that hurts you in a game like this against Florida. I think this is also true with all due respect to Brew McCoy. He's probably a pretty good wide receiver. Jalen Hyatt won the Biletnikoff Award a year ago. You can say what you want to about Tennessee. Clearly, we say plenty, but they had some real offensive firepower a year ago. I think they still score plenty of points this year, but to the tune of a wannabe Heisman finalist or a Biletnikoff Award-winning wide receiver or a guy like Tillman when healthy who was also very good too, that level of talent does not seem to be present with Tennessee right now. So if they couldn't beat Florida easily in their own stadium a year ago, I don't see how they win easily in Florida Stadium here this year on the road now. And you say, well, this is just speaking to how bad Florida is. I think they play better on Saturday, Gators do, than they played at Utah a couple of Thursday nights ago. Paul Moon talking about Ra Thomas. Tomorrow will be a very good day for one of Georgia's transfer wide receivers to have a very good day. Nature says, watch for the young Florida safeties to make critical mistakes. Could be the case, and obviously if you're at a place against Tennessee, that's the one thing that they're going to exploit. But what's interesting is Austin Peay, Virginia, Tennessee actually hasn't had as many big plays as you think they might would have had. Now, they blasted Virginia, but Virginia's worst team in Power 5. They have not had massive big plays yet, but if the safeties are out of place, Tennessee will make you hurt on that. That goes back to, remember Kirby yelling at Keely Ringo during practice, the audio that got leaked about Tennessee getting layups, and they want to put you in a tough spot so they can get those layups. So your safety's got to be careful. They do that. That is indeed the case. Frank Patterson brings up an interesting point that some of the Todd Monken offensive success also coincided with Darnell Washington always being here. I think it's a fair point. Now, I guess I'm just going to die on this hill. I realize that Georgia does not have Mount Olympus as a tight end the way it would have had with Darnell Washington. But when Georgia wants to be in 2 tight end sets, I still think they're going to be okay. Like, to me, the comparison for, like, say, Oscar Delp is he as good as Darnell Washington was? The comparison, I believe, is he as good as the guys he's going to be lining up against, or better than the guys he's going to be lining up against? And I think he can be. So I get the idea that it feels like, well, Georgia's really missing something when it comes to Darnell Washington. Y'all, let's judge this after Saturday. I can't tell you why, but my hunch is the Georgia offensive line plays better. And when Georgia chooses to go to 2 tight end sets, and sometimes it will, I think my hunch is that's going to be pretty good too. There'll never be another Darnell Washington because I don't know that there ever has been another Darnell Washington. But I still think that Georgia's going to be okay when it goes to his 2 tight end sets. But no doubt, Frank's point's an accurate one, which is that that Monken definitely benefited from having a unique weapon like that. Yeah, Paul Moon says if you forget to put your secondary out there, Milton's going to carve you up. I mean, certainly that Tennessee offense is capable of doing that. And a lot of this kind of comes down to, can you stay in position? It's a little, Kirby talked about this back in last year, and it's true that it's a little bit like the triple option thing of, staying at home, staying disciplined, guy comes near your way, make the tackle, and if you just keep staying disciplined, gap sound, the coaches love talking about being gap sound. If you're disciplined and sound, keep making the tackles that come your way, eventually you'll have a chance to kind of force them to make some mistakes. But that is important. Doug Rayburn says on Facebook, not many Darnell Washingtons come down the road. Yeah, he's amazing. And we talked about that some the other day about already in the NFL. He's bullying. Can you imagine bullying an NFL player? Like Darnell's like bullying NFL players. That's crazy to me. Keith Fold says that Brock's a better athlete than Darnell Washington. I believe that's true. I think Brock Bowers is one of the great players in the history of this program, regardless of position. I think he's already on the Georgia Mount Rushmore. Darnell is just a freak of nature. All right. Anything else before we go? Let us see what else. William Camacho says, nobody cares about those lousy, stinking Gators because they're no good on both sides of the ball. Well, there you go, William. There you go. Kevin Cook, Jacob O'Neal. Oh, calling for the upset for South Florida against Nick Saban. I think Alabama's going to be interesting to watch on Saturday. They're 32.5-point favorite, I think. I've sort of expected the game to be a little closer than the experts think they're on that. It's a weird road game for Alabama going to Tampa to play this. And I'm not quite so sure I'm not kidding. Saban's on TV every week now with McAfee, got the big expensive house down there in Jupiter, Florida. Is that a coach capable of firing his charges up to kind of show up angry and motivated after a loss to Texas last week? We'll find out. Remember, even the best version of Alabama, September has not always been the best month for them. Keep that in mind. Late September swoons, Alabama's had a few of those. Just keep that in mind. Bill Sanders asking if I've been corrupted. Do I seem corrupted? Kevin Cook, good to have you here. Appreciate that. Jacob O'Neal, thanks for the kind words. Peachtree TV tonight, really fun one. Blessed Trinity and Marist. And at least one of the players on the field tonight, I believe, is going to be hearing from Georgia a lot in the next couple of years. That's a freshman pass rusher on the Blessed Trinity side, David Jacobs Jr. That's a really, really, really fun player who's just a freshman. So anytime you have a great atmosphere, Blessed Trinity always is. 2 very well-coached teams. That's good TV, right? And I like a crisply played game on television. It's easy to watch. And Blessed Trinity and Marist, 2 of the best coach teams in the state. So that's going to be a lot of fun tonight. And you want to get an early jump on a 2027 name to know? David Jacobs Jr. is one of those for sure. All right, we got to go. Y'all check out RS Andrews online. We'll see you for Go with the Flow, presented by RS Andrews tonight. Also, if you want to keep everything flowing around your house the way it's supposed to be, water coming out of your water heater or air conditioning coming out of your AC vents, all of that made easier when you find RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, RS Andrews can replace it for you the same day, but you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. Enjoy the weekend. See you tonight on Peachtree TV for high school football in Athens tomorrow. And if you see me, please come say hello, especially at the UGA bookstore after the game. I'm not going to lie to you. I'll be self-serving for a couple of seconds here. We need good calls. We need good commenters. We want to have a fun, fan-oriented conversation, so we need a lot of good Georgia fans to do that. So be a part of that with us tomorrow for our DawgNation postgame show from the UGA bookstore. And then I'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will talk to you then.